Welcome to the Daily Insider here on Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers as we look ahead to Thursday, December 2nd, 2021. And we got plenty to talk about today. Vince Akins will join us coming up in just a few moments, go over some of the top trends for the NFL and college football, several of the college football championships this weekend, also the Thursday night game between the Cowboys and the Saints, and a couple games on Sunday. We'll look at those with Vince coming up in just a few minutes. But before we get to Vince and also look at the NBA card for tonight as well, I want to say about BetMGM. They are the king of sports books. New players only. Bet $10 to win $200. If your team scores a touchdown, bet on any NFL money line. And if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. Must be 21 years or older and eligible in the following states: Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That is BetMGM. They are the king of sportsbooks. All right, let's bring on Vince Akins, and he's here to discuss some of the top trends for the weekend. And Vince, good to talk to you again. Let's begin with tonight. The Cowboys and the Saints, they are hooking up at the Superdome. New Orleans has a lot of injuries they're dealing with. Alvin Kamara likely not playing tonight. We'll see Taysom Hill start at quarterback, so that'll be a new wrinkle for Sean Payton after the Trevor Siemian experiment didn't work out too well after Jameis got hurt. But what do you have for tonight between the Cowboys and the Saints?
Sure, thanks for having me. And yeah, I do think, just looking at the game before we get into the trends here, that Taysom Hill at quarterback does give the Saints at least an interesting wrinkle first time starting the season. So where we are with the Saints here is historically in the Sean Payton area, they have been extremely strong as an underdog, as I'll show with a few trends here. However, the last few weeks, they've also been underdog and have been snapping a few of these long-term team trends. So it's interesting. I'll let you guys be the judge here on a couple of these. I'm starting with, so before last week, New Orleans had covered 10 straight times when they were on a 3+ game losing streak. So that last week snapped that, did not cover against the Bills, and rode that losing streak to 4 straight games. So active again this week. So now they've covered 10 of the last 11 when they've lost 3+ straight games. Another one of these big trends that was active last week was snapped, but is active still again. The Saints are now 14-1-1 against the spread, going back to January 2014, when they're dogs of more than 3 points and they're facing a team above 500. So we're in that situation again this week. That trend was perfect before last week, facing the Bills as underdogs against the above 500 team. Cowboys in that same situation this week. So now 14-1-1 the last 7 years here as a dog of more than 3 points facing a team above 500. And one other longer-term team trend for the Saints that wasn't snapped last week because it wasn't active. This goes back to the early days of Sean Payton's tenure there, all the way back to 2007. Saints 12-0 against the spread, coming off a loss where they had no more than 15 first downs in the game. So last week they picked up just 12 as their offense really sputtered in that loss to the Bills, coming off a loss where they weren't able to move the ball consistently, less than 15 first downs. They've covered 12 straight times in this situation.
Yeah, it's a real tough one because you see New Orleans, Vince, again as a home dog after Buffalo blew them out last week. And New Orleans was good as a dog early, and they've struggled since with the loss to the Eagles and the Bills. And now, obviously, they'll be a dog against the Cowboys. I'm really concerned about Dallas, too. McCarthy's not there. I know people say, well, it's an upgrade that McCarthy's on the sidelines for them. They're getting Amari Cooper back. They're getting CeeDee Lamb back. So for Dallas, off the bad loss to the Raiders, you kind of wonder now, do you back them because of everything with New Orleans, or can the Saints pull one together here and get a win?
Yeah, it's a tricky game. Yeah, I don't think, I know a couple of teams have had success. Cardinals earlier this year without their head coach, the Browns in the playoffs last season. But I don't think it's really an advantage over any one-game sample to be missing your head coach. Maybe in the long term, the Cowboys, you could argue maybe not. They'd be better off without McCarthy. But I think in the one game, trying to replace him, it's not to your benefit.
Now, let's look at some of the college games for this weekend. We have 3 of them we'll highlight in the conference championships. Let's start in the American, Houston and Cincinnati. Obviously, the Bearcats win and most likely into the college football playoffs. So a lot of pressure on Luke Fickell's team. And now I guess Luke is probably in a better headspace because he's not going to get the Notre Dame job, which it looked like he was rumored for, that Notre Dame filled with one of the assistants. But Houston's had a pretty good season as well under Dana Holgorsen, he had kind of struggled early there after coming over from West Virginia, but they've had a good season. The Bearcats, though, a double-digit favorite. What'd you dig up on this game?
Yeah, Houston really, I think, a bit under the radar as far as teams go this year. So I actually want to talk about two games here. We'll talk about this Houston-Cincinnati game. At the same time, talk about Michigan-Iowa in the Big Ten championship, only because a couple of these systems looking at conference championship games specifically are active on both teams. When you think about these situations, same line in both games. Both situations have a team in Cincinnati and Michigan that's basically win and get into the college football playoffs. So very similar situations between these two. So I want to look at two different NCAA-wide situations here. The first, looking just at conference championship games. I was interested to see how do double-digit favorites do in conference championship games. These are the two games, the AAC and the Big Ten, that have double-digit spreads in the conference championships this week. Going back, teams are 22-32 against the spread as double-digit favorites in conference championship games. So it's that 41-42% against the spread. Not that impressive as double-digit favorites in these games. So looking at the other side, both these teams in Houston and Iowa, big underdogs in this game. And that's not something they're used to. In fact, neither of these teams has been a double-digit underdog this season. So going back to 2011, so the last decade, teams that are double-digit underdogs for the first time all season in at least game 10 of the year. So we're talking late in the year. Obviously, we're into the conference championships now. Those teams have covered 58% of the games when they're double-digit dogs for the first time, at least game 10 of the season. So that applies to both Houston and Iowa in these two conference championship games. So now I want to pull up a team trend for each of these teams, looking as them as heavy underdogs. Situations Houston and Iowa doesn't find themselves in all that often. Starting in Houston, going back to 2013, 9-0 against the spread as a double-digit dog if they did not lose by more than 14 points last game. So obviously last week they blew out UConn. That part doesn't apply. But as double-digit dogs, then 9-0 against the spread going back to 2013. So for Iowa, looking over a similar time frame, going to January 2014, as a 7+ point dog, games where they did not cover by at least 50 points, which wasn't the case last week in their close battle overtaking Nebraska. 6-0 against the spread as 7-point dogs. So both these teams find themselves looking at Iowa and Houston, similar situations, not double-digit dogs that often, and have team-wise both fared pretty well against the spread as larger underdogs to the lines that we're looking at in these games.
I find it so interesting, Vince, because Cincinnati and Michigan are both in similar situations from the standpoint of, again, winning and being in. Michigan, a lot more solid. They win, they're in. Cincinnati, you would think would be in if they win. But I always look at it like this. I feel like the pressure is so much on them. Michigan is coming off. Harbaugh and Michigan are coming off their biggest win in a very long time. Harbaugh has had that Ohio State monkey on its back. You live up in Ohio. You know all about that rivalry and what it means. Harbaugh finally slayed the demon. Now you face Iowa. Not saying this game is not important. It definitely is. You get in the Final Four. But you kind of wonder now, Michigan, a dog against Ohio State last week at home. Now all of a sudden you're favored by 10 in a neutral site game. Iowa's always tough with Ferentz. That, I don't know, this could be that spot. You have a lot of the trends to that back it, but this could be a spot where maybe Michigan's a little overvalued. Do you agree? Yeah,
and particularly thinking about the low total in this game, I believe you had 43.5 up here. So you're talking about Michigan being a double-digit favorite in a game with such a low total. And you think about the Iowa, the way they like to play. It's really a team that does not get blown out very often in that long-term era there. So you think about, they had success as a heavy underdog. And the reason really is that, Iowa's a team that does not get blown out all that often. And so it'll be interesting to see if Michigan can develop a game plan to get there. I could easily see Michigan winning this game, but not covering the spread in it.
Now let's look at the SEC showdown, Vince. Georgia, Alabama. And we just talked about Harbaugh finally beating Ohio State. Kirby Smart needs to beat Alabama. I mean, this is the time. You're nearly a touchdown favorite. You got to do it this year. Alabama almost lost to Auburn last week in the Iron Bowl. They won, so they stay alive because that's what they always do somehow. But Georgia laying 6.5 in Atlanta against Alabama. What do you got?
Yeah, and this is obviously an interesting game because you think about the scenario. A huge game for Georgia, everything you just laid out. But interestingly, they're, I imagine in all likelihood, in the college football playoff, win or lose. where Alabama probably needs to win this game to get in. So starting with obviously seeing Alabama as a 6.5-point dog, had to look at Alabama playing as an underdog. And the last time Alabama was underdog of more than a single point dates back all the way to 2009. So if you want to look at team performance, I don't think it's too noteworthy to look at them as an underdog, considering they've been underdogs just once in the last 12 seasons, and that was just a 1-point underdog. I believe it was back in 2015. What I did then was look at how's Alabama perform when they're not favored by more than 7 points. So touchdown or less favorite or underdog, which doesn't apply to them. But going back to January 2016, most of those are either bowl games with a couple of SEC championships in there. Just 2-7 against the spread for Alabama. That goes back to January 2016, where they were not favored by more than 7 points. 1-1 against the spread against Georgia in those games. For reference, that was a couple of close lines in their recent Georgia matchups. Georgia, meanwhile, in that same situation, not favored by more than a touchdown, 16-8 against the spread over that same time period. So a lot more games, but have performed pretty well in tight line games, Georgia compared to Alabama. So finally, looking at the complete opposite spectrum of the line, Georgia coming off that complete rout of Georgia Tech last week, where they were 35, 36 points favorites. So looking back just 2018 games coming off a game where Georgia was favored by at least 34 points. We're talking about kind of a cupcake game going into most likely a tougher matchup next week. 6-0 against the spread for Georgia. Just going back to 2018, they were at least 34-point favorites last week. So not the most challenging game. A lot of those were non-conference cupcake games. A little more time to rest up for the next week. Georgia's performed well in the situations. Finally, a couple of team trends here for the total in this game. You see it at 49.5 there. Alabama has gone under 10 straight games. This goes back to 2012 when they failed to cover by more than 12 points last game, but weren't 50-plus point favorites. So eliminated a couple of the most outrageous Alabama lines there. They failed to cover by at least 12 points last game. Next game goes under. And that, last week they failed to cover by 18.5 points, barely squeaking out that win over Auburn. And in that game, Alabama trailed at the half. I was obviously shut out of the first half for the first time in some time. I did not look up how long ago that was. But trailing at the half, Alabama's gone under the last 6 times. And that goes back to, I believe, 2015. Alabama came back to win the majority of not all of those games. But trailing at the half, the next week gone under 6 straight games.
Yeah, it should be very interesting to see what Alabama does in the underdog role coming up on Saturday when they face Georgia, and the Bulldogs laying 6.5 here. Now let's go to the NFL here, Vince, and let's go to the Steelers and the Ravens. That's a big game inside the AFC North. Pittsburgh's really struggled of late. I mean, they look bad against Cincinnati. The Ravens' offense hasn't been great of late, but we'll see what Mike Tomlin's got here in this big AFC North matchup. Yeah, interesting matchup. Obviously, Baltimore, the record-wise, it's still there, and you think the track record with Baltimore, but the performance-wise, it's been a little shaky with the Ravens. Obviously, with the Steelers, it's showing up in the record now, their shaky performance. So a couple of things we've talked about in the past year. I think that Steelers have some very interesting team trends, particularly because their quarterback and coach have been there for so long. So first off, seeing them as a 4.5-point home dog, knew that was a rare situation. The last time Pittsburgh was a home dog of at least 4 points was all the way back to 2016. So obviously this is an outlier line as far as Steelers getting this kind of points at home. So just looking at the last few years here, though, they are 4-0 against the spread since 2018, playing as home dogs. Extending that a little further, 8-2 against the spread since 2013 as home dogs. Steelers have won 3 of those last 4, including that was Denver. Ironically, they were home dogs against earlier this year. You think about that line now, that might not be the case currently, but earlier this year they won outright as a home dog against Denver back in week 5. Otherwise, coming off that huge loss to the Bengals last week, that ended up being a 31-point home loss, or 31-point loss that might not even have been that close, if you can say that about a 31-point game. But the Steelers 11-2 against the spread. This goes all the way back to 2000, coming off a 20-plus point loss. So have bounced back really well. Obviously, there's a lot of games closer than that.
the last 20 years, coming off a 20-plus point loss. Interestingly, the Steelers have fewer games in this situation over that time than any other team in the league. So they've had less blowout losses of 20-plus points over that time than New England, the Saints. You think about other strong teams over the last 20 years. But Pittsburgh's done a really nice job, obviously, a lot of that time, and most of those victories coming in the Tomlin and Roethlisberger era, bouncing back off these huge losses.
Yeah, and the Steelers too, Vince, they were a pretty good underdog overall this year before that loss to Cincinnati. A lot of people were jumping on them in the contest last week thinking, oh, you got him as a dog, but just wasn't the case. Now, a home dog, like you mentioned, some really good numbers there. 4-0 ATS as a home dog since 18. And I remember that Bronco game. I had Pittsburgh that game thinking, all right, this is a good spot to take them. They almost blew it at the end. Denver almost tied it. But that was a good win for Pittsburgh, and we'll see if they do it again. Now the Sunday night game. Originally it was 49ers Seahawks, got flexed out for Broncos Chiefs, thankfully, just because the Seahawks are bad. But Kansas City now laying 9.5 to Denver. We know about Teddy Bridgewater's numbers as a dog. They're great. They're coming off a good win over the Chargers last week at home. Kansas City, they're rolling, and you really wonder if Denver is stepping on the train tracks right now. But what do you have with the Broncos and the Chiefs, Vince?
Yeah, well, I don't know how often you're going to see a game flexed into Sunday night that ends up having a 9.5 point spread. But yes, we are talking about two above 500 teams playing for the AFC West lead here. And that it's interesting and kind of brought up an interesting situation I wanted to look at today. So pulled up a league-wide system here. Teams that are there are more than 8-point dogs in the regular season that are above 500 at least 10 games in the season. So we're looking at this situation second half of the season above 500, but getting this huge number like the Broncos are here. Teams are just 28 and 43 historically against the spread in this situation. So you think about, big line team that's pretty good. Teams that are above 500, past game 10 of the season, they're playing for something as far as playoff goes, which is definitely the case with the Broncos here. The lines have generally been warranted and actually have even underrated the favorites in these situations. Actually, and just going back to December 2014. The last 11 games, this has been active. It's 2-9 against the spread. This is the first time this season. Obviously, we're just past the game 10 mark for most teams that this has been active. So interesting. Denver getting huge dogs. As huge dogs, you might think it's a value, playing for a huge situation in the season. Usually that's not been the case. And to close out here, a couple of big total trends, one for each team here. You see that total at 47.5 here. First off, for the Chiefs, coming off the bye, and we didn't talk about it here, but against the spread, Andy Reid historically has been a strong coach again, coming off the bye. But looking just at the team total here, last game they were just 2.5-point favorites playing Dallas. Now laying 9.5, so that line jump. The Chiefs, going back to October 2015, have gone under 17 straight games at home when the line's at least 5 points lower than last game, and they weren't 4+ point dogs in that game. So this is a 7-point jump or 7-point line move in their favor this week, playing at home. They weren't big underdogs in that last game. Gone under 17 straight games in that situation. This was active once already this season in Kansas City's Week 8 Monday Night Football win over the Giants. That was a low-scoring 20-17 win. I went way under that total. And finally, the last trend here, really I would say that the trend of the week, Broncos, you mentioned coming off that big 28-13 win over the Chargers last week. Going back just December 2017, Broncos have gone under in all 16 games coming off a win by at least 7 points. So, a solid TD plus win last week, winning by 15 points. Broncos have gone under 16 straight times, just going back to December 2017, coming off a win by 7+ points. And that's already five unders this season. It was active actually weeks 2, 3, and 4, and then a couple of times recently here. So you think about Denver's wins this season by 7+ points have gone under the next week each time.
Vince Akins, you could find his work at Vegas Insider and handicaps multiple sports, also on Twitter at SB Breakers. Before I let you go, Vince, your Cleveland Guardians are on ice for a little bit now. I guess we'll see when they come back. Yeah, well,
all the signings they've made as the Cleveland Guardians, are really being put on hold here until we get back. So, the flurry of off-season activity for the Cleveland baseball team has been put on hold.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. But the good thing is, though, is that we have football and basketball and hockey. We got other stuff going on. So, I mean, I don't look at it as being heartbroken. I love baseball, but I say there's enough stuff going on. Call me in 3 months when we get closer to the season. They'll be concerned. December 2nd, I'm not concerned right now.
Yeah, this is me. This is my personal opinion, not necessarily handicapping, but I wouldn't be heartbroken if it wasn't a 162 game baseball season this year. If we ended up at 120 games or 130 games, I honestly think that might be the right number for baseball rather than 162 anyway. So come April, yes, if we're still locked out, definitely going to be sad. And then particularly once you start talking about once college basketball ends there, really once basketball and the NBA get deep into the season, if we're still not playing baseball, then there might be a lot of sitting on our hands come summertime. But right now I'm not too worried about it. And if they end up missing a few games, we get down to 120, 130, 140 games on the season. Don't think that's the end of the world either, personally. But
yeah, I think it'll all be all right. Vince Akins, you can find him again on Twitter at SB Breakers. Also, all of his picks at Vegas Insider. Vince, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone.
All right, there is Vince Akins, and a lot of good trends that he digs up every single week. I mean, I really do like the Steelers this week. I think this is a good opportunity for them to get back on track. Last week was probably not the right spot. I wasn't on that game. But Pittsburgh, though, with everything happening, I'm sure Tomlin behind the scenes is trying to get his team back in order. And also for Baltimore, that offense has scored 16 or less in 3 straight games. Understandably, Lamar Jackson missed the Chicago game, but still the offense has not really looked very good for the Ravens of late. So maybe this is a good chance for the Steelers to maybe grab the cover. Who knows, an outright win, but that's one to keep an eye on Sunday in the NFL. Now, before we talk about the NBA for tonight, I want to tell you about DraftKings and the championship series. You could be the GOAT. You see him, he's wearing the crown. He is proud to wear that crown, and you can do the same. DraftKings Championship Series is the ultimate competition of contest winners from daily fantasy sports, sportsbook, and casino. The one and only place you can compete in the king of competitions. The best of the best in each domain will compete for series supremacy in their own domain's Tournament of Champions. They'll have one goal in mind: win the ultimate crown and earn the title of the greatest of all time, the GOAT. You could be that GOAT. Wear that crown proudly. Go to DraftKings.com for more details. That is the DraftKings Championship Series. All right, let's take a look now at the NBA for this evening. In case you missed it last night, quickly in college basketball, the Big Ten ended up winning the ACC Big Ten Challenge. It came down to the end, but they ended up winning. Wisconsin was the clincher against Georgia Tech. Also, some of the ACC teams stepped up last night with wins. NC State beat Nebraska in 4 overtimes. Miami held off Penn State. And North Carolina routed Michigan. The Wolverines now with 3 losses so far on the season. Juwan Howard's got to get his house back in order in Ann Arbor pretty soon, or the football team is just going to roll through for the next month. All right, let's take a look at the NBA. Bulls and Knicks, they're meeting up for the 3rd time this season tonight. And they are hooking up at Madison Square Garden with Chicago as a short road favorite. Zach LaVine is probable for tonight. Bulls come in at 14-8. New York at 11-10. The Knicks have actually been pretty good off of a loss recently, beating Indiana, Houston, the Lakers, Atlanta. They've actually alternated wins and losses each of the last 9 games, coming off the 2-point loss to Brooklyn a few nights ago. And the Knicks have covered their last 2. Chicago, meanwhile, they've been up and down. They beat Charlotte back a few days ago, 133-119 at the United Center. And the Bulls and Knicks have split 2 meetings this season, both games staying under the total. And this total at 209.5, which is the lowest total of the 3 so far on the season. It was 216.5 in the first matchup in Chicago, 104-103 win by the Knicks, then a 109-103 win by the Bulls. Back about a week and a half ago, stayed under 213, and now it's down to 209.5. The Bucks and the Raptors from Toronto. And I find this game very interesting because Toronto actually owns one of the worst home records, or actually the worst home record, tied with Detroit and Orlando in the league at 2-8. And they've been awful ATS as a home dog, 0-4. Also 0-4 straight up and against the spread as a home underdog this year. But they get Milwaukee, who has won 8 straight games off that 127-125 win over the Hornets last night, laying 9. So Milwaukee didn't cover. Milwaukee's been on fire. Toronto has lost 3 straight. It just feels like the formula to take Toronto tonight. And the Raptors, they've scored 97, 97, and 91 the last 3 games. They were held to 91 against Memphis back on Tuesday night, laying 2.5 against the Grizzlies, and they ended up losing that game outright. They were down basically that whole game. They made it close in the second half, but I think this could be that spot where maybe Toronto picks up the cover and even the win. The Thunder and the Grizzlies from Memphis. John Morant still sidelined for the Grizzlies, and Memphis had that big win over Toronto back on Tuesday. The Grizzlies right now, 11-10. It's been an up-and-down season for them. Oklahoma City, they lost to Houston for the second straight time last night, and the Rockets all of a sudden are heating up after that terrible start. But Oklahoma City has lost 7 straight games. They had covered 5 in a row before failing to cover against the Rockets each of the last 2. Now they're getting 9.5. And you look at some of the numbers when they've gotten points, they fared well. Getting 6.5 against Washington, lost but covered. 14.5 against Utah, lost but covered. 13 at Atlanta, lost but covered. 9.5 at Boston, lost but covered. 13 at Milwaukee, lost but covered. So now we'll see if the Thunder can keep that trend going. Memphis has won 2 in a row, but Memphis laying a bunch tonight. And I mean, Oklahoma City, I think it's kind of one of those things that's so weird. Since they lost to Houston twice, you want to see anybody else, so maybe that could be a good thing for the Thunder. But they're still the Grizzlies still heavy favorites tonight. Pistons and the Suns out in Phoenix. Devin Booker likely won't play tonight. Hamstring injury. Phoenix 17 straight wins off the Golden State victory. Maybe this is the letdown here without Booker. 18-3 for Phoenix. Detroit's just 4-17. And Detroit so far on their road trip, 5-game trip. They played 4 games so far. Lost by 21 at Milwaukee, 11 to the Clippers, 4 to the Lakers, lost by 18 without Damian Lillard the other night at Portland. And again, the Suns are rolling along. But now, without Devin Booker in the lineup, Detroit final game of the road trip, they know who they're playing as far as a team that's won 17 straight. See if Detroit hangs around in that one. The Spurs and the Blazers, the final game in the NBA tonight out in Portland. Damian Lillard, he's not going to play. He's out. I believe an abdomen injury, right? Yeah, abdominal. Again, still one of the oddest things of the NBA this season. Portland 10-1 at home, 1-10 on the road. So 11-11. Moda Center, great home court advantage. Road, terrible, and the only win came at Houston. San Antonio 6-13. They've been awful, even though they've won 2 straight. It's still been a tough season for them. They beat Boston and Washington at home. Now they go on the road, where they have struggled. They went 0-3 in their last road trip. And Portland, again, great at home, but without Lillard. I mean, Portland coming up, they got Boston at home, Clippers at home at Golden State, so a rough road for them. San Antonio goes to Golden State and Phoenix after this. So you could play it one of 2 ways and think, all right, Spurs probably won't win those games, but you get a lot of points in those 2. Or do you take San Antonio here thinking, all right, they got no shot to win at Golden State and Phoenix. You might as well take them here where Portland's without their best player. I'm staying away from this game tonight. All right, before we head out, we'll talk about the NFL game. And Cowboys laying 6 to the Saints. Obviously, desperation time for Dallas. Mike McCarthy, he is not coaching the game tonight. Instead, it's Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn's been an NFL coach with the Falcons. We know all about that. No Alvin Kamara for the Saints. They have a couple other injuries. So they're a banged-up team. Pressure squarely on Dallas that they're still going to win the NFC East, but you want to think about your seeding in the NFC. Arizona's played very well. Green Bay has played well. The Rams have fallen off a little bit, but if you're the Cowboys, you can't afford another loss. But as far as this game goes tonight, I still take a shot at the Saints, even getting 6. Taysom Hill's going to start a quarterback. It can't be any worse with him than it was with Trevor Siemian. And Trevor Siemian really struggled. he played well against the Buccaneers after Jameis Winston got hurt. And in that game, the Saints, they were winning. I mean, it came in the middle of the game. But the last few weeks, the offense just hasn't been there. And I think now that even with Kamara out, Taysom Hill brings a different element. Dallas must win. I hate taking teams in must-win spots because there's so much pressure there that I'm going to take the points with the Saints tonight. I know it's crazy to think with all the injuries, but New Orleans, after getting blown out by Buffalo last week at home, this is a spot for them against Dallas. BetMGM, you know who they are. They are the king of sports books. And new players only. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. That's right. Bet on any NFL money line. And if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. Again, new players only. Must be 21 years or older. Eligible in the following states: Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That is BetMGM. They are the king of sports books. All right. My thanks to Vince Akins for hopping on and checking out his trends for the weekend for NFL and the conference title games. We'll be back with you tomorrow at noon Eastern, and we'll talk about the title games as well as the NFL Week 13. All of that we are looking forward to tomorrow to close out the weekend. And that's it. In baseball, we'll see in a few months. You guys figure it out. Not going to make a big deal over it at all with everything else going on. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for tuning in to the latest edition of the Daily Insider. And as always, best of luck with your bets.